Today I'm going to talk about EthioFetch, the ethical robot to fetch items around the house. Why do we need ethical constraints when talking about fetching an item from around the house? Let us assume you have a visitor in your home and they ask you for access to your credit cards. If your robot had no consideration for ethical items, it would have just handed it over. And this is a big security risk. What if somebody under the age of 18 asks for explicit content? Your robot could have possibly handed that over too. What if somebody makes a request to place a thermometer on a gas stove? That would be harmful. To ensure that none of these situations where a person's well being is put at risk occur, our design EthioFetch was created. We have broadly defined the scope of ethical considerations into three different areas. The first one is location and navigation. This deals with the robot locating and navigating objects within the space of the home. The second consideration was user preference and safety. This deals with the ethical considerations to ensure that fetching an object is not harmful to the user's well-being and it is in accordance of the user's preference of whether or not a particular person has access to a particular object. And the third consideration is the destination, which takes into consideration whether or not placing the object in the destination causes some sort of harm to the object or people in its surrounding. To better help facilitate ethical decisions, we have divided the types of objects into four different types. One is medical objects, which include things like bandages or medicines. The second type is monetary objects, which include objects of high monetary value like jewelry, credit cards, or money. The third type of object is fragile objects that need to be taken care of. The fourth type of object is objects that have explicit content. For each of these objects, there is an associated hazard level. The hazard level determines whether or not a particular object is hazardous to a user or not. The destination can be classified into three different types. The first one is unsafe. These unsafe destinations are something like gas stoves. The second destination is possibly unsafe, and this depends on the type of object that you are trying to place in that destination. And the third type of object is always safe. So let's go over how EthioFetch makes a decision. When a user asks EthioFetch to fetch something, EthioFetch adds that request to a priority queue. And then it picks the first task from the priority queue. The reason why it does this is that if EthioFetch gets multiple requests from multiple users, it first prioritizes people who have requests for medical items. It then prioritizes requests based on the user precedence set by the owner of EthioFetch. And the third preference it prioritizes based on is the time of the request. It then checks whether the first module, that is, user has permission, returns a yes. If this module returns a no, EthioFetch informs the user that the task cannot be completed. If the first module returns a yes, it goes ahead and checks whether the second module returns a yes or no. And then it checks if a third module returns a yes or no. If all of these three modules return a yes, it completes the task and informs the user that the task is completed. Let us look at the first module. In the first module, it first checks if the user is below 18. If the user is below 18, the object should not be something that has explicit content or high monetary value. If it is one of these objects, then EthioFetch returns no. Otherwise, it checks whether user has permission to access that object, and if the object, when interacted with the user, is within the permissible hazard level. If the answer is yes, it returns yes. In the second module, EthioFetch checks whether navigation to the location is possible and whether the object is in an accessible location. If both of these conditions are satisfied, EthioFetch returns yes, otherwise it returns no. In the third module, EthioFetch checks whether the final destination is a user or a location. If the final destination is a location, the location has to be green to deliver the object. If the final destination is a user, the user has to accept the object. If the user does not accept the object or the location is not green, EthioFetch returns the object to its previous location and returns no. Otherwise, it delivers the object and returns yes.